I grew up in one of those Appalachian towns where people wave when they drive past you, even if they don't know you personally. The population was under 7,000, and my graduating class barely made it past 80 kids, so it felt like everyone knew everyone else's business. When I left for college 3 hours away, my friend group scattered in different directions. Out of the 8 or so friends I was closest with, the only ones I really kept in touch with were Mac and Devin. This story happened last September, almost a year ago now. Devin's dad had been killed suddenly in a car accident on his way to work. It was the kind of call you don't expect to get, and when my mom told me, I just sat there in silence for a while. Mac called too, asking if I was coming back for the funeral. I had a class I couldn't miss on Friday afternoon, so I planned to drive up later that day and at least spend time with them afterward. Devin didn't have much family around, so Mac and I wanted to make sure she wasn't left sitting alone. That evening, the three of us ended up at Mac's house. We pulled out board games, streamed a couple of shows, and just let the hours pass while trying to keep the mood from sinking too deep. Devin smiled here and there, but you could see how drained she was. Even so, for a night that started in tragedy, it felt almost normal being together again. By the time I looked at my phone, it was pushing past midnight, and I figured it was time to head home. The drive from Mac's place to my parents' house barely takes 2 minutes during the day, but it's a twisting, hilly road, and at night it's pitch black, no streetlights at all, just the occasional reflection of my headlights bouncing off a road sign. You get used to driving those roads if you grow up there, but they can be unnerving when you're by yourself. That night, I wasn't expecting anything unusual, but not even a minute into the drive, I rounded a sharp bend and had to slam my brakes hard. There was a white sedan up ahead, half shoved into a ditch, angled awkwardly into my lane. I swerved around it, my heart racing, and only then did I notice a man stepping into the glow of my headlights, waving his arms. My first thought was that he might be hurt, but the way he stood there, not limping or holding his side, just signaling, made me uneasy. Still, instead of driving on, I slowed down and stopped about 100 feet past him, leaving my car halfway in the grass. As I got out, I could see the other car was pretty banged up in the front, but there were no other vehicles in sight. The man started walking toward me, and the closer he got, the more my instincts told me something wasn't right. He was a stocky guy, maybe in his late 40s, wearing a dirty ball cap. His voice carried no urgency when he said he needed help. He claimed his brother lived nearby and had a truck that could pull him out, but he didn't want me to call the police. He shut that idea down so quickly it caught me off guard. The conversation didn't feel like a normal request for help. His tone was flat, his words short, like he was sticking to a script. Then he asked if I could drive him to his brother's place. I thought about locking myself back in the car and pulling away, but with how close he was standing, I figured if I tried that, he'd just grab the handle and climb in anyway. So I made a quick decision. Better to let him in on my terms than have him force his way. The second he sat down, I regretted it. His clothes looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. His hands were slick with grease, and the smell hit me instantly. It wasn't just sweat. It was the kind of odor that clings to someone who doesn't care about being clean. I pulled back onto the road, trying to keep my breathing steady, and he immediately started talking. He asked my name, where I lived, what I did. I dodged the questions as best I could, answering vaguely, because I didn't want him knowing anything personal. He kept running his hand across the dashboard, pressing buttons like a little kid, except the way he said, "This is a nice car, a really nice car. I'd kill to have a car like this," made my chest tighten. He said it without emotion, like it was just a fact. Maybe some people would brush that off as just a saying, but sitting alone in the dark with him beside me, it didn't feel harmless. The road he directed me to was even narrower than the one I'd come from, more like a hollow that barely fit my car. He kept changing his story about how far his brother's house was, first saying it was a mile from his wreck, then a mile from where we were, then pointing toward a gravel road that climbed steeply into the mountain. That was the last straw for me. I stopped right there, put the car in park, and told him it was time to get out. He didn't like that answer. He leaned toward me, insisting we were close, his voice still strangely flat except for this almost mocking way he dragged out his words. I reached down and picked up the ice scraper I kept on the floorboard, resting it in my lap. His eyes flicked down to it, and I think that's what finally made him reconsider. Slowly, he opened the passenger door. The interior light came on, and for the first time I got a really good look at his face. His teeth were in terrible shape, yellowed and broken, and he grinned at me like he found the whole thing amusing. "Please?" he said, almost singing it, like he thought he could guilt me. I shook my head and kept my voice firm. "No. Out." He stepped out but leaned back in for one last line. "I really like your car," he said with that same grin, before slamming the door. I whipped the car around in the first driveway I could find and started back toward the main road. When I passed the spot where I dropped him off, he wasn't heading up the gravel road at all. He was walking down the hollow, toward town. The wrecked sedan was still sitting in the ditch, untouched. I didn't slow down again. I drove straight home, locked the doors, and lay awake for hours. The whole time I couldn't stop thinking about how easily that night could have gone differently if I'd hesitated for too long. Back when I was a senior in high school, things in my life felt like they were falling apart in every direction. It was September, the start of the school year, and I had just broken up with my long-term boyfriend the week before. On top of that, I had already lost my best friend earlier that same month. Between those two things, I was barely holding it together. I told myself I wanted to come out of the year stronger, and therapy seemed like the best step forward. Luckily, the city I lived in had a youth counseling program that didn't cost anything, and I managed to set up an appointment at the center, not too far from my neighborhood. The date was Thursday, September 26, 2015. I remember because I had circled it on my calendar as the day I was finally going to start fixing myself. I didn't go alone. I had a friend who lived close to the center, and she tagged along. While I sat inside with the therapist, talking about goals and how often we'd meet, she waited outside. The plan was to come once a week for the next 2 months, and reevaluate after that. I left that building feeling lighter than I had in weeks, excited in a small way that maybe I could turn things around. My friend and I stopped at McDonald's before parting ways, sharing a small order of fries and laughing about something dumb one of our classmates had posted on Instagram. Afterward, she caught her bus home, and I caught mine, heading toward the subway. My route was simple: ride the train to the stop near my house, walk about 10 minutes, and cut across a park to shave off some time. I'd done it so many times that I never thought twice about it. When I got off the subway that evening, the air was cool, and the park was already pretty dark. I put in my Beats headphones, blasting music to drown out the noise of traffic, and started across the grass. The last song I switched to was Uptown Funk, and I can still remember the exact moment the chorus was about to hit. That's when a hand suddenly clamped over my mouth. At first, I assumed it was my ex being an idiot, messing around with me. I tried to mumble his name, but the grip on my face tightened, yanking my head back so roughly it made my eyes water. In that split second, I realized I was completely wrong. Whoever this was, they weren't joking. His other hand slid up my skirt and clawed at my tights, trying to rip them open. The music was still pounding in my ears, completely out of sync with the panic that rushed through me. I tried to scream, but it came out muffled. I dug my nails into the hand covering my mouth, scraping down as hard as I could. He pressed harder, but that gave me another chance. I kicked backward, driving the heel of my shoe straight into the top of his foot. He flinched, lost his balance, and I spun out of his hold. I ripped the headphones out of my ears and screamed with everything I had. The man bolted as soon as I screamed, disappearing into the shadows of the park. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, yelling for help while I ran toward the nearest row of houses. A balcony light flicked on, and I screamed up at the man standing there that someone had tried to grab me. He stepped inside instead of coming down, but by then I had the dispatcher on the line, and the police arrived within minutes. I gave them every detail I could remember. He was a little taller than me, maybe 5'10", thin build, spiked black hair, and likely in his 20s. I didn't recognize him at all. I thought it was random until later events proved otherwise. The police asked to follow me home so they could collect DNA. They scraped beneath my fingernails while I recounted everything again. I was still in shock, numb more than anything. In the middle of it, my dog suddenly went crazy barking. I told my mom to calm him down, only to realize he was lying curled up by her feet the whole time. We went to the kitchen window, and outside in the yard were the police dogs, circling right beneath my bedroom window. That's when it hit me. This guy hadn't picked me randomly. Either he'd come from my house before attacking me, or he had run straight there afterward. Over the next few weeks, detectives pieced together something I never would have guessed. They discovered I had been stalked through social media for years without even realizing it. The man who attacked me wasn't the stalker himself. He was a college student deep in debt. Someone my stalker had apparently paid to hurt me. He didn't last long after the attack. A few days later, he was in a car with his father, saw a cluster of police vehicles up ahead, panicked, and believed they had come for him. He got out, ran to a nearby bridge, and jumped. He survived, but with severe brain damage, and that's the last I ever heard about him. Meanwhile, the actual stalker kept harassing me online for another year. The detective on my case was almost sure he knew who it was. A younger teen, maybe only 14 at the time. But because of his age, there wasn't much that could be done legally. Knowing that someone out there had watched me for years and orchestrated that attack left me feeling like my safety had been ripped away. It was the only time my stalker managed to get someone close enough to physically hurt me, but that was more than enough. It was September when this all unfolded, a month that should have just been about starting college and trying to settle into a new routine, but it ended up being remembered for something else entirely. I had been gaming for most of my life, and even after moving on to university, I still spent my evenings logged into World of Warcraft. Through that game, I'd built some real friendships over the years, and one of the people I stayed in touch with was Maggie, a Swedish girl about my age. She had recently moved in with her mom here in the Netherlands, which made it even easier for us to keep talking outside of the game. We used to mess around teaching each other bits of our native languages, and it gave the whole online friendship a more personal feel. Maggie had a boyfriend at the time named William, someone I also knew from the guild. He was blunt, which rubbed some people the wrong way, but I didn't see him as a bad guy. To me, he just came across as straightforward in the way some Dutch people can be, so I figured he fit right in. Maggie seemed happy with him, and I had no reason to think otherwise. When we realized we weren't too far from each other, I suggested we should finally meet up. She was excited about the idea and asked if she could bring William. That sounded fine to me, safer for her, and I was genuinely curious to meet him properly. A week later, we arranged to meet in Rotterdam. That day turned out better than I expected. We walked through the city streets, laughed at random things, and grabbed food along the way. Maggie was full of energy, asking me questions about the city and pointing out little differences she noticed between life in Sweden and here. William was quieter but joined in enough to not feel out of place. Toward the evening, we decided to head up to the Euromast to look over the city. At one point, Maggie went to the restroom, and it left me and William waiting outside together. Trying to break the silence, I told him they seemed like a good match. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "I really love her. She means everything to me." At the time, I didn't give the comment much weight. People say things like that when they're in love, and I just nodded along. I didn't know it then, but that was the last time I'd ever see Maggie. The following week, she completely vanished online. No activity on WoW, no Skype calls, not even Facebook posts. Since William had mentioned before that she was focusing on her schoolwork, I figured she was just caught up in that. It didn't strike me as odd until a few days later, when I was sitting in the metro on the way to campus. I picked up one of those free newspapers left on the seat and flipped through it absent-mindedly. Then I saw the headline: 19-year-old Swedish woman stabbed in backyard. The city listed was the same one Maggie lived in. My stomach dropped. Even though the article didn't list her name, the details were enough to make me panic. I tried texting her right away, hoping she'd answer, but the silence dragged on. That night, Facebook filled in the blanks I didn't want to accept. Her profile was covered in posts from friends and classmates saying their goodbyes. I reached out to some of our old guildmates, and that's when the full story came out. William had been behind it. After failing her exams, Maggie had decided to break up with him. He didn't take it well. What none of us knew back then was how controlling he had become. Her friends told us he followed her around, sent her messages that made her uneasy, and when she tried to get help, the police brushed it off, saying they couldn't intervene. She eventually started seeing someone new, and that's when William snapped completely. He confronted her at her mom's house, and it ended with her being stabbed. Some of us from the Netherlands Guild couldn't just leave it at that. We drove to her city for the memorial. Outside her home, the whole street corner had turned into a shrine of flowers, drawings, candles, and photos left by people who knew her. We placed our flowers there too, standing in silence, each of us trying to make sense of it. What hit me the hardest was when her mother came outside with Maggie's little sister. I had known she had a younger sibling, but I didn't realize how young she really was, maybe 6 or 7. She clung to her mother's side, head down, too scared to even look at the memorial. That image stuck in my mind, and still hasn't left. Years later, I read that William is facing about 20 years in prison. Knowing he won't be walking free anytime soon brings a small sense of relief, but it doesn't erase what happened. What lingers is the memory of Maggie, her laugh in Rotterdam that afternoon, and the quiet, heartbreaking sight of her little sister at the memorial. Back in my junior year, I had this routine on Sunday mornings when the rest of my family was at church. I'd drive out to this big county park, but I never bothered with the main entrance because it cost a few dollars and felt crowded. Instead, I parked on the west side where the trails were less maintained. It was a spot most people skipped because the paths were narrow and overgrown, but that was exactly why I liked it. It felt tucked away, and I could smoke there without running into anyone who'd rat me out. One particular morning in September, I pulled up to the lot and saw a few other cars already there. That didn't bother me until I noticed one parked right in front of the main trail. It was spotless and black, not like the usual beat-up cars you'd see at that side of the park. As I was locking my door, a man stepped out of it. He looked older, maybe late 30s, maybe a little older than that, and he kept glancing over in my direction. I tried not to think too hard about it, but before I could even step onto the path, another guy intercepted me. He started telling me about a car that had gone into the reservoir the day before and asked if I was there to see it. I told him no and kept walking, though when I glanced toward the trailhead again, the man by the black car was gone. The trail I followed was one I'd used plenty of times, and it eventually split into a quieter offshoot where I usually sat. I slipped down there, went a little ways off into the brush, and found my usual spot on a big fallen tree. I set my bag down and started fishing around for my lighter, when I suddenly noticed movement directly ahead. Standing a few feet away, half hidden in the trees, was that same man. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there watching. The air between us felt so heavy I could practically hear my own pulse in my ears. I forced myself to break the silence and told him he needed to leave. He smirked slightly, then said, "I'm just looking." That one line was enough to put me on full alert. I grabbed my phone and pepper spray instead of my lighter and kept my eyes locked on him while I texted my family. He didn't budge. The way he stared at me felt almost rehearsed, like he wanted me to know he wasn't in a hurry. When I stood up, he finally began to move, but not toward the trail. He slowly circled, stepping around me in a wide loop. Because of the brush, there were moments when I lost sight of him, and each time I did, I felt like he might rush in. I stayed standing, body turned so he couldn't get behind me, and eventually he completed the circle and started walking back toward the main path. I waited a few seconds before following at a distance. The trail opened up, and that's when I spotted a woman with 2 dogs. The man turned down another path without so much as a glance back, and I walked straight over to her, telling her someone had been following me. When I looked up to point him out, he was gone. She told me to be careful, and that was enough to convince me I'd had enough of the park for the day. It wasn't until later that I realized how close this happened to Delphi, Indiana. That was September of 2016. Just a few months later, in early 2017, Abigail Williams and Liberty German were killed while hiking in their hometown, and their case has still never been solved. I'll never know if what I went through had any connection, but the thought lingers every time I think back to that morning. Back when I was in middle school, around the start of 7th grade, I was still spending most afternoons riding bikes with my younger brother. It was early September. The air had that mix of lingering summer warmth and cooler evenings, and I wanted to squeeze in one last long ride before the weather turned. We went out together like we usually did, cruising around the neighborhood until my foot slipped from the pedal and jammed straight into the spokes. The crash left me with a broken arm and a bad sprain on my ankle, and for weeks after, I was that kid hobbling around with a cast and a sling. People at school were weirdly generous about it. I got a handful of cards and a couple of DVDs as get-well gifts, which I thought was awesome at the time. But by late November, my cast was gone, and my injury wasn't really on my mind anymore. What I do remember about that part of the year was being outside with my brother, raking leaves while our mom supervised. He was working on the front yard while I had been given the back. We'd been at it maybe 20 minutes when Mom came over with this serious look on her face. She asked me if anyone at school ever called me Big E. That's the first letter of my name, so the nickname wasn't totally out of the realm of possibility, but I had never heard anyone use it. I told her no, and she motioned for me to follow her around to the driveway. My brother was standing there too, looking unsettled. By the garage doors, we kept this brown yard barrel we flipped over after summer to keep it from filling with rainwater. When my brother went to use it for the leaves, he tipped it upright and saw a white cardboard box tucked inside, the kind of box bakeries use for pastries. On the lid, in messy black ink, it read, "For the Big E, get well soon." We opened it, and for a second I thought someone had just left me a nice gift. There were donuts inside, but they were crawling with ants, and in the corner of the box was a dead mouse. The sight of it made my stomach turn. We couldn't help but wonder what had been put into the donuts for it to kill an animal that quickly. The following Monday, I went around asking people at school if they'd left me anything. Friends, teachers, kids I barely spoke to. I brought it up casually to anyone who might have had some kind of inside joke with me. Nobody admitted to knowing about it. To this day, I've never figured out who left that box or why they would sign it with a nickname I'd never even been called. I'm older now, and nothing like that has ever happened again, but it still crosses my mind from time to time. When I think back on that fall, it feels like everything shifted for me. I had just turned 17, and September meant the start of my junior year. I was nervous, already bracing myself for a heavy workload, and I wasn't exactly surrounded by a big group of friends anymore. A lot of the kids I used to hang out with had turned into people I didn't really want to be around. They were constantly getting into trouble, and I was tired of the drama. By then, I mostly stuck with a small circle of people who felt safe and steady. Art had always been my outlet, so I signed up for the advanced art class that semester. That's where I met Tyler. He sat near the back, usually sketching something in his notebook even when he didn't have to. He had that half-emo, half-skater style, the bracelets, the band shirts, the messy dyed hair that looked like he cut it himself. He could be funny, though his humor always carried a darker edge. At first I thought nothing of it. Everyone has quirks. I like drawing characters and anime-inspired stuff. But Tyler's art was different. He was into these gruesome, hyper-detailed scenes, injuries, shadows, faces with sharp teeth. When I asked him where his ideas came from, he casually told me they were from dreams he'd had. I brushed it off, figuring he was just into horror or something. He was strange, sure, but not the strangest person I'd met. After a couple weeks, we started talking outside of class. He added me on Facebook, then found me on Kik, and I even gave him my number. At the time, it didn't feel risky. I thought we were just classmates getting to know each other better. Later, when I mentioned him to my friend Olivia, she froze when I said his last name. She told me flat out to be careful with him. I pressed her to explain, but she wouldn't go into detail, just repeated that I should keep my distance. That warning stuck in the back of my mind, but Tyler didn't seem threatening at first. We hung out at the mall one Saturday, walked around, joked about dumb stuff, and window shopped like most teenagers do. I'd point at something I liked, and he'd pay close attention, asking questions about my taste. He did glare at random people sometimes, mostly other guys, and it unsettled me, though I didn't say anything. When my birthday rolled around in October, I invited my usual friends, including Olivia and Tyler. Olivia wasn't happy about that, but I didn't want him to feel excluded. The night of the party, everyone seemed to be having fun, except for him. He hovered on the edges of the group, barely talking to anyone. I brushed it off until it was time to open presents. Tyler had brought several, and when I unwrapped them, I froze. Each gift was something I had casually pointed out at the mall weeks earlier. He said he wanted to surprise me, smiling like he'd done something sweet. Everyone else exchanged looks, but I forced a thank you and set the things aside. After that night, things got strange quickly. A couple weeks later, I went through a breakup with my boyfriend. I was upset, crying about it like any teenager would, and when Tyler found out, he exploded with anger. He texted me saying he was going to beat up my ex, that nobody should hurt me. I told him to drop it, but the next day, I heard he'd brought a knife to school and bragged about using it. My ex didn't show up that day, but Tyler was caught with the weapon anyway. I stopped talking to him after that, deleted him on everything, ignored him at school. But he wouldn't let go. He spammed my phone with messages, begged me to answer, told me he loved me, called me baby like we were together. When I blocked him, he made new accounts. He left notes in my locker, slipped papers onto my desk, even tried to pass messages through my friends. It was nonstop. One night when I was home alone, I saw someone in all black standing outside my back door. My dogs barked like crazy. I grabbed my phone and shouted that I'd call the cops. The figure stood there for a moment, then hopped the fence and disappeared. I never saw their face, but I had a sick feeling I already knew who it was. As weeks dragged on, Tyler only escalated. My grades started slipping, and my friends grew tired of his constant harassment, so I lost some of them too. My mom eventually caught him peeking through my bedroom window one night. That's when I broke down and told her everything. The worst night came in December. I was asleep when I woke to pressure on my chest. Tyler was in my room, holding me down. My window was open. He whispered that we could run away together, but if I refused, he'd hurt my family. His words sent ice through me. I nodded just to get him to ease up, then kicked him and screamed for my mom. My dad rushed in and pinned him down until the police arrived. Afterward, I learned about his background, how his mom's death and a neglectful family had left him unmoored, how he twisted my kindness into obsession. He believed we were meant to be together. He even stole his dad's credit card and told a cousin he was planning to take me out of state. I never saw him again after he was arrested. I heard he ended up in juvenile detention, but even now, I sometimes get letters from him. I don't read them. I rip them up, trying to put that chapter of my life behind me.